She burned the ultrasound. When she discovered he was engaged to someone else. But the Mafia boss tracked her down. "You belong to me." Serena's fingers, still smudged with oil paint, trembled against the phone screen. She scrolled through the article again and again, willing the images to change, but they never did. There was Dante Carluchi in his flawless black suit, one powerful hand curved possessively around the waist of a stunning woman, Valentina Romano. The name burned through Serena's mind like poison. Just 3 days ago, she had been sitting in a sterile doctor's office, clutching the ultrasound photo with pure wonder. Now that same photo felt like a cruel joke, evidence of how thoroughly she had been played. 6 weeks. She had been carrying his child for 6 weeks, and the whole time, he had been planning a wedding to someone else. Serena clicked on the stove. The blue flame flickered to life. The ultrasound photo crumpled in her shaking hand. Tears rolled down her face as she lowered it into the fire, watching the flames consume the tiny image of their baby, consuming every foolish dream she had ever dared to believe. "You don't get to own this," she choked out. "You don't get to own me." The paper curled and blackened, falling into the sink as nothing but ash. Her chest ached with emptiness, as if she had just set fire to a piece of her own heart. Her palm pressed flat against her stomach. Still no bump, but something was growing there. Something that would tie her to him forever if she let it. More tears came. She had to run, vanish without a trace. Before he discovered the truth, before his brutal empire could sink its claws into the one innocent thing she had left. If this story hooks you, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who craves the drama, and subscribe so you don't miss what satisfies next. The smell of ash still clung to Serena's fingertips when she pulled an old travel bag from under the bed. 4 o'clock in the morning. The tiny studio apartment lay drowned in darkness, with only streetlight slipping in through the narrow gap in the curtains. She moved fast but soundless, as if afraid the very walls might be listening. She opened the vanity drawer and took out $843 in cash, everything she'd managed to save over the past few months. Not much, but enough to disappear. She shoved a few changes of clothes into the bag, along with her passport and her mother's silver locket, the only thing left from the woman who'd left this world when Serena was 16. She'd never opened it, as if she feared whatever was inside would hurt her more. But she always carried it, a quiet reminder that she'd once been loved, even if only for a brief time. Her phone lay on the table, the screen still lit with an article about Dante and Valentina's engagement. Serena stared at it for a long moment, then picked it up and slammed it hard onto the floor. The screen shattered. She hit it again and again, until it was nothing but a mess of plastic and splintered glass, cutting off every trace, cutting off every way he might find her. The Brooklyn apartment was silent as she pulled the door shut for the last time. Every footstep in the hallway echoed like a drum inside her chest. Every small sound, a cat crying somewhere, the distant hush of traffic, made her flinch and look back. She knew Dante had people everywhere. She knew his world had no borders, but she had to try. For the baby. For herself. The Greyhound station was nearly empty at dawn. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a cold, unfamiliar glow. An elderly woman sat behind the ticket counter, thick glasses on her nose, working on a crossword. She looked up when Serena approached. "Where to, sweetheart?" Serena glanced at the departures board. Hartford, far enough to vanish, close enough that she could afford it. Hartford, earliest one. The woman tapped at an aging keyboard, printed the ticket, and handed it to her with a gentle smile. "Leaves in 20 minutes. Bay 3. Be careful." Serena sat in the farthest corner of the waiting room, the bag on her lap, her eyes fixed on the entrance. Every person who walked in made her heart kick wildly, but no one paid her any attention. She was just an ordinary girl with reddened eyes and an old travel bag. No one knew she was carrying the child of one of the most dangerous men in New York. On the bus, Serena chose a seat by the window in the very back. She watched the city recede as the wheels began to roll. Manhattan's towers shrank, then vanished into the early morning haze. And she thought of him, the nights Dante had lain beside her, his arm locked tight around her as if he feared she'd dissolve. The whispers in Italian she couldn't understand, but that still made her heart melt. The way he looked at her like she was his whole world, the only thing that mattered. Was it all a lie? Just a game for a powerful man, killing time before stepping into a political marriage. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, let them carry off whatever was left of that foolish love. The Starlight Motel sat on the outskirts of Hartford, a 2-story building with a flickering neon sign and a parking lot that was nearly empty. The room Serena rented smelled of old cigarettes and cheap disinfectant. The curtains had faded, the bed sheets were stained, and the faucet was rusted and dripping. But the door had a lock, and no one knew she was here. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the worn springs sink under her weight. Exhausted. She was so exhausted she didn't even have the strength to cry anymore. Her hand rested on her stomach, still flat as if nothing had changed. But something was growing there, something innocent, something that belonged only to her. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself, to the baby not yet formed. Tomorrow I'll start over. I can raise you alone. I'll do it. She lay down, pulled the thin blanket up to her chest, and for the first time in hours, she felt like she could breathe. Safe. She was safe. Her eyes closed, and sleep drew her into a gentle dark. She didn't know it would be the last night she'd ever sleep in peace. Early sunlight slipped through the gap in the worn curtains when Serena jolted upright and rushed into the bathroom. She clutched the toilet and retched violently, again and again, even though her stomach was empty. Morning sickness. A cruel reminder that no matter how far she ran, something still tethered her to the man she was trying to escape. When the nausea finally eased, she splashed cold water on her face and stared into the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, skin gone pale, brown hair tangled into a wild mess. She looked like someone on the run, because she was. Her stomach growled with hunger. She needed food, and she needed another pregnancy test, just to be sure, just to see those 2 red lines one more time and force herself to remember it was real. She pulled on her hoodie, shoved a little cash into her pocket, and stepped outside. The convenience store was a few hundred meters from the motel. She bought a loaf of bread, a bottle of water, and a pregnancy test. The cashier didn't look at her twice. She was just another customer on an ordinary morning. Invisible. Safe. But when she turned back toward the motel, her steps slowed. Something was wrong. Her door was slightly open. She remembered locking it before she left. Her heart stopped for a beat, then kicked into a frantic gallop. Maybe it was housekeeping. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was anything except what she was thinking. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door. The darkness inside the room felt thicker than she remembered. The curtains had been pulled shut, and in the corner, on the battered old chair, someone was sitting, legs crossed, silent, waiting. How far did you think you could run, Serena? That voice, low, cold, and so familiar it made her want to cry. Dante Carluchi stepped out of the shadows, the weak light from the doorway cutting across the sharp planes of his face. He was still in a black suit, as if he'd just walked out of an important meeting, not into a cheap motel room. His gray eyes held hers without blinking, cold as steel, sharp as a blade. Serena stumbled back a step, her spine hitting the door. The bag slipped from her fingers, and the pregnancy test rolled across the floor. Dante's gaze flicked down to it for a second, then returned to her, the corner of his mouth lifting into a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're carrying something that belongs to me." He spoke slowly, each word measured, and his eyes dropped to her stomach. Serena felt her blood turn to ice. "How do you know?" Her voice was barely a whisper. She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't even managed to believe it herself. "The doctor at the clinic is mine." Dante moved one step closer. "I knew before you did. Before you saw those 2 red lines. I got the call." The floor seemed to give way beneath her. "No, it couldn't be. You thought I'd let you walk around freely without anyone watching." Dante tipped his head, his tone gentle, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "From the first day you walked into that gallery in Soho, my people have been on you. Every day, everywhere you went. Every painting you made, every cup of coffee you drank." He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of his expensive cologne. "I know which place you like for breakfast, which park you like to walk in, which nights you cried alone. I know everything, Serena. Everything about you." She shuddered, the nausea rising again, but this time it wasn't morning sickness. "You're insane," she said, her voice shaking. "Maybe," Dante agreed, without a trace of shame. "But you're still mine." Serena's hand flew up before she could think. The slap cracked through the silent room, hard enough to turn his head to the side. But Dante didn't dodge. He didn't get angry. He only turned back, slowly, a faint red mark blooming on his cheekbone, and caught her wrist before she could pull away. It didn't hurt, but it was certain, like a shackle. "I hate you," she forced out through clenched teeth, tears spilling over. "I know," Dante replied, his voice softening just a little, his thumb brushing absently over the frantic pulse at her wrist. But that doesn't change anything. Another figure appeared in the doorway. Tall, expressionless, Nico, Dante's right hand. He didn't speak, only stood there waiting. Dante released her wrist and took a step back. Take her home. Serena wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but she knew it was pointless. In Dante Carluchi's world, no one got away. No one. They led her out to the black car waiting in the lot. The door shut. The engine started. Through the tinted window, she watched the Starlight Motel grow smaller, then vanish behind the bend in the road. Her freedom had lasted exactly one night, and now she was going back to her gilded cage. Serena opened her eyes and didn't recognize where she was. A ceiling soared high above her, crowned with a crystal chandelier. Dark gray velvet curtains sealed off the windows, and white silk sheets lay soft against her skin. She sat bolt upright, her heart hammering. This wasn't a cheap motel. This was a bedroom so lavish it felt unreal, like something torn from the glossy pages of an expensive interiors magazine. A penthouse. She was in Dante's penthouse in Manhattan. The memory of the long ride back came flooding in. How she'd been worn down to the bone and had drifted off in the back seat. How someone had lifted her up and laid her in this bed. Serena slid down to the floor, her bare feet sinking into thick, plush carpet. She went to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and froze. The glass was unnaturally thick, the kind of bulletproof glass she'd only ever seen in movies. Manhattan spread out below, high-rises glittering like a faraway world she couldn't reach. She turned to the bedroom door and twisted the handle. Locked. She tried again. Harder. Still locked from the outside. A prison plated in gold. Serena searched the room, her fear growing sharper by the minute. A walk-in closet was as large as her old apartment, filled with clothes in her exact size, from silk sleepwear to evening gowns, from high heels to sneakers, all high-end brands, all fitted perfectly. In the bathroom, she found the skincare she always used, the shampoo with the scent she loved, even the toothpaste she bought at the corner grocery in Brooklyn. On the bookshelf beside the bed, the novels she'd been reading were lined up neatly, and there was the watercolor instruction book she'd once added to her online cart but had never been able to afford. Everything was hers. Everything had been prepared for her. For a long time. She wasn't a sudden lover. She was prey, hunted from the start, studied, watched, understood, down to the smallest detail. And now, she'd walked straight into the trap. The days that followed became a chain of desperate attempts. The first time, Serena used a bobby pin to pick the lock, the way she'd seen in movies. It took her 2 hours to understand the mechanism, and when the door finally clicked open, her heart surged with hope. But Nico stood just outside, his back against the wall, as if he'd known exactly how long it would take. He said nothing, only gently pushed her back into the room and closed the door. The second time, she pretended she had severe stomach pain, screaming and crying, hoping they'd take her to a public hospital where she might find a way to run. But Dante took her himself, sat beside her in the car, held her hand while the doctor examined her, his gray eyes never leaving her for even a second. When the doctor said she was fine, Dante looked at her with an expression that was both disappointed and amused, as if she were a small cat putting on a little show. The third time, she approached the housekeeper, a middle-aged woman who seemed kind. Serena asked her to send a message outside and promised generous payment. The woman nodded and took the scrap of paper. The next day, that housekeeper was gone. No one mentioned her again. No one explained, and Serena understood she might have just made an innocent person pay the price. That night, Dante came to her room. He wasn't angry. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He only sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her with a calm so cold it made her blood run thin. He said that every time she tried, he'd tighten the hold, and asked if she wanted him to strap a tracking cuff to her ankle, if she wanted him to lock her in the room all day, if she wanted him to cut off every point of contact between her and the outside world. She didn't answer. He didn't need an answer. In the 8th week of the pregnancy, Dr. Helena came to examine Serena at the penthouse. She was a middle-aged woman with silver hair and keen, incisive eyes, the private physician of the Carluchi family. She examined Serena carefully, announced the fetus was healthy. Then when Dante stepped out to take a phone call, she turned to Serena. She spoke softly and said he had never kept anyone here before her. Never. And Serena didn't understand what she meant. The doctor said that the other women in his life had come and gone, that no one had been allowed into this penthouse, that no one had been allowed to know this place existed, and that Serena was the first. She paused, her gaze complicated, and said Serena was different to him, and she didn't know whether that was good or bad, but Serena was different. That night, Serena couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling when she heard footsteps in the hall and Dante's voice carrying in. He was on the phone, his tone ice cold, sharp as a blade. He said to deal with him. He didn't need to hear reasons. End it tonight. There was silence for a moment. Then he continued, even colder. He said slow and painful, and make sure the others saw the price of betrayal. Serena stopped breathing. This was the real Dante Carluchi, not the man who'd once whispered sweet words against her ear, not the man who'd once looked at her like she was the only light in his life. This was a monster, a cold-blooded killer. Her door opened softly. Serena squeezed her eyes shut, steadied her breathing, and pretended she was deep asleep. She heard footsteps come lightly to the bedside, felt his presence as he stood there watching her in the dark. Then a hand touched her hair, gentle, trembling, stroking each strand as if she were something precious, something fragile. The hand of a man who'd just ordered a killing was smoothing her hair with a tenderness she couldn't understand at all. Dante stood there a long time before he left, closing the door with a care so soft it was as if he feared waking her. Serena opened her eyes in the darkness, her heart racing. She hated him. She was afraid of him, but she wasn't sure anymore which feeling was stronger. 2 weeks passed inside the gilded cage. The pregnancy moved into the 10th week, and Serena began to get used to the nausea every morning, to waking up in a room of luxury that she didn't belong to seeing Nico posted outside the door every time she stepped into the hallway. But she could never get used to Dante's presence, to the way he looked at her as if she were something precious while she knew perfectly well she was only a prisoner. That afternoon, Dante came to her room earlier than usual. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He simply walked in as if everything in this penthouse, including her, belonged to him. But today something was different. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before he spoke, as if weighing every word. You need to know this. Serena lifted her eyes from the book she was pretending to read. Dante's gaze was strange, not cold the way it usually was, but tense, almost defensive. Tonight there's an engagement party. Mine and Valentina Romano's. Publicly. She felt as if someone had driven a fist into her chest. She knew about Valentina. She'd read the article. But hearing him say it out loud, in the room where he was keeping her and their child, still stole her breath. This isn't the wedding, Dante went on, his voice stiff, like he was reciting a business report. It's only the engagement. The wedding is planned for 3 months from now. But you need to understand why. Why? She laughed, and the bitter sound rang through the room. You need to explain why you're marrying someone else while I'm carrying your child. The agreement with the Romanos was signed 2 years ago, when my father was still alive. Dante stepped closer, his voice dropping. This is an alliance between 2 families. If I cancel now, without a legitimate reason, Romano will treat it as a declaration of war. Blood will spill. Hundreds of people will die. My people, their people, innocent people too. Serena stood, backing away from him. So what am I? A mistress you hide in a private room while you get engaged to the Mafia princess out there. Dante's jaw tightened, teeth grinding. You're the woman I want. You're carrying my child. You're the only woman I've ever brought into this home. He moved closer, but she retreated another step. But I need time to handle it the right way. No blood, no war, time, she repeated, her voice shaking. You want me to sit here, pregnant with your baby, while you get engaged to someone else, and then wait for you to figure out a way out? Dante didn't answer. His silence hurt more than any words. Leave. She turned her back, not wanting to look at him for another second. Go get engaged to her. I don't need your explanation. He stayed a moment longer, and she could feel his gaze burning into her back. Then his footsteps faded, and the door closed. Night fell. Serena lay on the bed, unable to sleep, listening to the sounds drifting up from downstairs. Classical music, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. The party was happening directly beneath her, in this very penthouse, and she was locked in her room like a shameful secret. She hadn't meant to do this, but curiosity and pain tore her reason apart, and she found a stairwell that led up to the rooftop. The door wasn't locked. She climbed, the night wind slicing at her skin, and looked down through a slanted wall of glass. Below was paradise. Crystal lights glittered, white flowers everywhere, hundreds of guests wearing the most extravagant evening clothes. This was Dante Carluchi's world, A world of power, money, and alliances built on blood. A world she would never belong to. And at the center of it all, Dante stood there. A black tuxedo fit his tall frame perfectly, his black hair combed neatly into place, his face so handsome it hurt to look at. Beside him, Valentina Romano shone in a gown as red as blood, her glossy black hair, her perfect smile carved from ice. They stood together like a pair born to match. Serena watched as if hypnotized when Dante took Valentina's hand, when he drew out a diamond ring that caught the light, when he slid it onto another woman's finger in front of hundreds of watching eyes. And when they kissed, a brief kiss but unmistakably real, met with the crowd's applause, Serena felt something inside her break. He told her she was the one he wanted, but he was kissing someone else. He said he needed time, but the ring was already on someone else's hand. What were a man's words worth? What did they mean when his actions always moved in the opposite direction? Tears fell before she could stop them. She collapsed onto the cold rooftop floor, wrapped her arms around her belly where their child was growing, and sobbed until she couldn't control it. She cried because she'd been betrayed, because she'd been imprisoned, because she was carrying the child of a man who was getting engaged to someone else. She cried because she was foolish enough that her heart still hurt when she watched him kiss Valentina. She didn't know that below, in the middle of the celebration, Dante had looked up and seen her, a small, huddled figure on the rooftop, and his gray eyes darkened for a moment before he turned back with a false smile for the guests. Late at night, when the party was over and the penthouse had sunk into silence, the door to Serena's room opened. Dante stepped in, still in his tuxedo. But his tie was loosened, and his hair was no longer neat, and in his hand was the diamond engagement ring. Glittering, Serena lay facing the wall and didn't look at him. "Get out of here." Dante said nothing. She heard his footsteps come closer, then the soft tap of metal against wood. She turned and saw he had placed the ring on the table beside the bed. "It doesn't mean anything," he said, his voice low and exhausted. "To me it does." Her voice trembled, tears still clinging to her cheeks. "To me it means you chose her, in front of everyone, and I'm just a filthy secret you hide on the highest floor." Dante stood there a long time, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, closing the door softly. Serena lay alone in the dark, the diamond on the ring still catching the moonlight that slipped through the curtains. Why did her heart hurt so much? Why did she care who he got engaged to? She was his prisoner. She should hate him. She wanted to hate him, but her tears didn't lie. And that night, she cried until she had no tears left to cry. The 12th week of the pregnancy arrived with the worst wave of sickness yet. Serena wasn't nauseated only in the mornings anymore. She vomited through the night, her body twisting under relentless stomach spasms that never seemed to stop. She clung to the toilet until her knees bruised from kneeling on cold tile, her eyes raw and red from sleeplessness and dehydration. And Dante was there. She didn't know when he'd come in, but when she lifted her head between two heaves, he was sitting on the bathroom floor beside her. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and his hand was gently gathering her hair back, keeping it from sticking to her face. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask if she was all right, didn't offer empty comfort. He just sat there, held her hair, handed her a glass of water when she needed it, and waited. Serena wanted to shove him away, wanted to scream at him that she didn't need the concern of a man who'd gotten engaged to someone else. But she was too weak, too exhausted, and somehow his presence made her feel less alone. She knew Valentina had gone back to the Romano house after the engagement. She'd heard the house staff whispering that the boss's fiancé only appeared at public events, that she'd never set foot in this penthouse, that the main bedroom still belonged to Serena. Serena didn't ask Dante about it. She didn't want to know. But inside, she felt a little lighter, and she hated herself for that feeling. On the third night of the hellish stretch, when the last wave of vomiting finally eased and she lay drained on the cold bathroom floor, everything cracked. Tears spilled out without control, not from physical pain, but from something deeper, older, darker. "I was pregnant once." She heard her own voice, hoarse and unfamiliar. "When I was 22, my boyfriend told me he loved me, said he'd marry me, said he'd give me a family." Dante didn't move, didn't interrupt. He just sat there, listening. "When I told him I was pregnant, he said I was everything to him. He held me, kissed me, promised he'd take care of it all." Her voice broke. Then he left in the night. Not a word, not a message, I woke up and he was gone, like I'd never existed. She wrapped an arm around her stomach, where their child was growing, and sobbed. 2 weeks later, I miscarried. Alone in my rented room, blood everywhere. No one beside me, no one holding my hand, no one telling me everything would be okay. Silence stretched out. Serena didn't dare look at Dante, didn't want to see pity, or worse, indifference in his eyes. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady as stone. I won't leave you. She looked up, red-eyed, at him. Whether you want it or not, he went on, his gray eyes holding hers without blinking. Even if you tell me to go, even if you hate me, I won't leave you. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know whether to believe him. But that night, when he lifted her into bed and pulled the blankets over her, she didn't fight him. The next morning, when Serena woke up, the corner of her room had changed. A brand new easel stood by the window. Beside it, a box of high-end oil paints, a palette, brushes of every kind, and dozens of pristine white canvases. He remembered she was a painter. Serena began to paint to keep herself from going insane. The first paintings were dark and bleak, reflecting exactly what she felt. A bird trapped in a gilded cage, its wings drooping. A storm-tossed sea with a tiny boat slowly sinking. And gray eyes, cold but lonely, staring out from the canvas as if piercing straight through the viewer's soul. Dante didn't comment on the paintings. He only came to her room every night, sat in the armchair in the corner, and watched her paint in silence. Sometimes he brought work files, sometimes he just sat there and looked at her. His presence became so familiar that she began to feel the absence when he wasn't there. One night, as she was mixing paint for a new piece, the question slipped out before she could stop it. Why me? She turned to face him. You could have anyone, women more beautiful, richer, who belong in your world. Why an unknown painter from Brooklyn? Dante was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant as if he were looking back through years. The first time I saw you, he said, his voice softening. A small gallery in Soho, 18 months ago. I went there for business, a secret meeting with a partner, but I saw you. He stood and stepped closer to her. You were smiling at a painting you'd just sold. A real smile. Not a polite one, not a smile for advantage, just pure joy. His eyes found hers. In my world, no one smiles like that. Everything is calculation, profit, a knife at the throat. But you stood there, paint in your hair, clothes smeared, smiling like nothing in this life mattered more than the fact that someone had loved what you'd made. He stopped and drew a breath, and something in me broke. I can't explain it. I tried to stay away from you for 6 months. I told myself you didn't belong in my world, that I'd destroy you. But I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Serena didn't know what to say. She stood there, brush in hand, watching the most powerful man in New York confess his weakness. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But that night, after Dante left, she stood before a blank canvas and began to paint. This time, it wasn't darkness. This time, it was a door cracked open, warm golden light spilling through the gap, promising something on the other side. She didn't know what it was, but for the first time in weeks, she wanted to find out. In the 14th week, Serena began to grow used to the rhythm of life inside her gilded cage. She woke up, ate breakfast alone, painted by the window, read in the afternoons, and waited for Dante to come each night. Her belly had started to round, just enough that she noticed it in the mirror, just enough to remind her time was passing and she was still trapped here. That night she couldn't sleep. Pregnancy, cravings, strange and insistent, made her want something sweet. Maybe ice cream, maybe fruit. She knew the kitchen was somewhere in this sprawling penthouse, but she'd never tried to find it on her own. This time, her door wasn't locked. Serena stepped into the dim hallway, barefoot on cold marble. The penthouse was silent, lit only by low lights along the walls that guided the way. She passed the living room, the study, then wandered into a corridor she'd never seen before, and then she heard it. A scream of pain rose from somewhere below, muffled and desperate. The thud of blows, the crack of bone. Serena's heart went wild, but her feet carried her toward the sound anyway. She found a stairwell leading down to the basement, weak yellow light spilling upward from below. She knew she shouldn't go down. She knew she'd see something she could never forget, but she still descended, one step at a time, as if hypnotized. The basement was a bare concrete space, nothing like the luxury upstairs, and in the middle of it, Dante was standing there. White shirt, sleeves rolled up, spattered with blood. In front of him, a man was tied to a chair, his face swollen shut, blood running from his nose and mouth. Dante punched, precise, cold, without the slightest hesitation. "Please, sir, please spare me," the man moaned, his words warped by pain. "I didn't betray you. I swear to you." Dante didn't answer. He only hit him again, and Serena heard the cheekbone split. Blood sprayed across the concrete floor. The man cried and begged. Dante still didn't stop. This was the monster. This was the real Dante Carluchi. Not the man who held her hair back when she vomited. Not the man who bought her an easel and paints. Not the man who sat in silence watching her paint each night. This was a killer. Pure darkness. Serena stepped back, and the phone in her hand slipped free. The sound of it striking the floor exploded through the silence like a gunshot. Dante turned. His gray eyes met hers, and for a single moment she saw something flicker there. Not anger, almost fear. But she didn't have time to think. She spun and ran. Up the stairs, through the corridors, back to her room. She lunged into the bathroom and vomited violently, even though her stomach was empty. She cried, shaking, clinging to the toilet as if it were the only thing keeping her from breaking apart. The image of Dante's fist slamming into that man's face kept replaying in her mind. Blood, the sound of bone cracking, his cold, emotionless expression. 30 minutes later, her bedroom door opened. Serena was curled on the bathroom floor when she looked up and saw Dante standing there. His hands had been washed clean, but his shirt still carried stains of blood. He stayed in the doorway without stepping inside, as if waiting for her reaction. "Now you know who I am," he said, his voice low and hollow. Serena forced herself to stand, her legs trembling. "I've always known you're dangerous." Her voice was rough. But seeing it is different. She backed away as he entered the bathroom. Her spine met the wall and there was nowhere left to run. And in that moment she thought he'd hurt her. She thought she'd seen too much, knew too much, and that he wouldn't let her live. But Dante dropped to his knees in front of her, the most powerful Mafia boss in New York, kneeling on cold bathroom tile, looking up at her with eyes she couldn't read. "I'll never touch you like that," he said, his voice shaking. "Never. You're the only thing in this world I don't want to break." Serena couldn't speak. She only stood there staring at him, tears still falling. "My mother was killed in front of me," Dante went on, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. "I was 12. My father's enemies wanted to send a message, and the message was my mother's body on the floor, her blood soaking into the carpet." His voice cracked. "I watched her die and I couldn't do anything. I was too small, too weak. And my father, after we buried her, told me, 'If you're weak, you'll lose everything.'" He looked up at Serena. "I haven't been weak for a single day since. I became a monster so no one could ever take what I love from me again. Until I met you." Serena looked at him, at the man kneeling at her feet with old wounds written into his eyes. She didn't forgive what she'd just seen. She couldn't. But she began to understand that monsters aren't born, they're made. To understand that behind every darkness there's a child who was once terrified. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the familiar footsteps outside her door. Dante still came, as he did every night, standing on the other side of her door, guarding, waiting. Serena got up. She went to the door and opened it. Dante stood there, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. He'd changed his clothes. The blood was gone, but the darkness in his eyes was still there. She took his hand. The hand that had tortured a man in the basement. The hand that had smoothed her hair night after night. The same hand, two sides of the same person. She pulled him into the room, and she kissed him. The first kiss not because he forced her, not because she was trapped, but because she chose it. Because in his darkness she saw something familiar, something lonely and aching to be loved, just like her. Dante went rigid for a second, then he kissed her back, gentle and trembling, as if afraid she'd shatter in his hands. A boundary had been crossed, and they both knew they couldn't go back. In the 18th week, Serena's belly had grown enough that it couldn't be hidden anymore. Every morning she looked in the mirror and saw her body changing. Softer curves, skin brighter with a glow even though she was still a prisoner in a gilded cage. The routine ultrasound took place in the private clinic inside the penthouse, Dr. Helena arriving with her equipment and a professional smile. Serena lay on the examination bed, her shirt pushed up to reveal her rounded belly. Cold gel spread across her skin. And this time, Dante was there. He sat beside her, eyes fixed on the ultrasound screen as if he couldn't bear to miss a single second. The image appeared, blurry at first, then slowly sharpened. A tiny head, little fingers, the steady beat of a heartbeat filling the room. "Everything looks very good," Dr. Helena said, adjusting the probe for a clearer angle. "And I can confirm the sex if you want to know." Serena looked at Dante. He nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. "A girl." Helena smiled. "A healthy baby girl." Dante didn't speak. He just sat there, eyes shining under the lights, staring at his daughter's image on the screen as if it were the most miraculous thing he'd ever seen. His hand found Serena's and gripped it hard, almost painful. But she didn't pull away. She understood. She understood what it felt like to see a small life growing inside you, to know you were about to become a parent, no matter how insane the circumstances were. On the way back to her room, inside the private elevator, Dante spoke abruptly. "I'm going to break the engagement with Valentina." Serena turned to him, certain she'd misheard. "What did you say?" "The engagement," he repeated, meeting her eyes. "I'm ending it. Immediately." "What about the alliance?" She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "The Romano family. You said if you ended it there'd be a war, there'd be blood." "I don't care." Dante's voice went hard as steel. "My daughter isn't going to grow up under the shadow of a fake marriage. She isn't going to have to wonder why her father married someone else while her mother was hidden away like a shameful secret." The elevator stopped. The doors slid open, but neither of them stepped out. "She isn't going to have to call Valentina Romano her mother," Dante went on, his voice trembling with something Serena had never heard in it before. "Never. I'll find another way to keep the peace with Romano. Or I'll fight. But I won't let my daughter grow up like that." He turned to her and took her hand. "I want you, Serena. Not because of the baby. Because of you. Before I knew you were pregnant, before I brought you here, I wanted you." Serena didn't know what to say. She looked into his eyes, searching for the mark of a lie, a power play, but she saw only sincerity so raw it frightened her. She didn't answer with words, but she didn't pull her hand away. And for Dante, that was enough. The news of the broken engagement spread like wildfire. Within 2 days, every family in New York knew Dante Carluchi had ended his engagement to Valentina Romano, humiliating one of the most powerful families and keeping an unknown woman inside his penthouse. The Romano family took it as a declaration of war. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Serena was painting by the window when her door flew open with a bang. Valentina Romano stood there, hair black as ink, eyes cold as ice, a perfect face twisted with fury. She wore a dress as red as blood, her high heels clicking across the floor as she stalked into the room. "So this is the bitch who stole my husband." Valentina looked Serena up and down with open contempt. "Who do you think you are? Some nobody whore lifted into a queen because you knew when to spread your legs." Serena set her brush down and stood. Her heart raced, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "I'm the woman he chose," she said, holding Valentina's gaze without blinking. "And you're the one he left. So who's pathetic now?" Valentina's eyes flashed with pure rage. Her hand rose, ready to slap Serena across the face. But it never reached her. Dante appeared from nowhere, quick as a shadow, and caught Valentina's wrist in midair. He squeezed hard enough that Serena saw Valentina's fingers blanch with pain. "Touch her," Dante said, his voice so cold the air in the room seemed to freeze. "And I'll send each of your fingers back to Romano, in separate boxes." Valentina yanked her hand away, her eyes burning with hatred as they moved from Dante to Serena and back again. "You'll regret this, Dante," she said through clenched teeth. "Both of you will regret it, I swear." Then she spun and walked out, the sharp click of her heels echoing down the hallway like the countdown of a bomb. Serena watched Valentina disappear, then turned to Dante. He really had chosen her. He really had given up an alliance, challenged a powerful family, just so she and their daughter wouldn't have to live in the shadows. But Valentina's eyes as she left still haunted her. That wasn't the look of a woman who'd been rejected. It was the look of someone planning revenge. And Serena knew the real war had only just begun. In the 22nd week, everything changed. For the first time since she was brought back to the penthouse, Serena was allowed to step out into the real world, not as a prisoner, but as the woman beside Dante Carluchi. He took her to closed-door meetings in luxury restaurants, places where men in expensive suits lowered their heads when he walked in. She saw the way they looked at him, reverence braided with fear, the way they said Don Carluchi with a tremor in their voices. And she saw the way they looked at her, the mysterious pregnant woman at the boss's side, with a mix of curiosity and caution. No one dared meet her eyes. No one dared ask who she was. She was introduced simply as Don Carluchi's woman, and that alone was enough to make people bow their heads. Serena didn't know what to feel about this power. Power borrowed from the darkness of the man beside her. One evening near the end of the month, Dante brought her to a party hosted by allied families at a mansion on Long Island. She wore a floor-length black dress, soft silk hugging the curve of her now obvious belly, her hair pinned up to bear the clean line of her white throat, and the diamond earrings Dante had given her that morning. When she entered the grand hall beside him, Serena felt hundreds of eyes turned toward them. She heard whispers, saw appraising stares, but she lifted her chin and set her hand on Dante's arm as if she belonged here. The party moved on through polite conversation and glasses of wine she wasn't allowed to drink. Dante introduced her to allies, powerful men who inclined their heads to her as if she were a queen. But she also noticed different eyes full of hatred from supporters of the Romano family, people who saw her as the reason the alliance had shattered. When she excused herself to use the restroom, she didn't realize she was walking into a trap. The hallway that led to the bathroom was quiet and poorly lit. She had barely stepped out when a figure blocked her path. A tall man, his face flushed with liquor, wearing a gray suit with the Benedetti family crest on his lapel. An old ally of the Romanos. So this is the whore who made Don Carluchi lose his mind. He sneered, whiskey heavy on his breath as it washed over her. Word is, you've got something special. Let me see. He grabbed her wrist and yanked hard. Serena didn't think. The survival instinct she'd learned living alone in Brooklyn flared. She lifted her foot and drove the heel of her shoe into the top of his foot with all her strength. He screamed, his grip loosening, and she tore herself free. Touch me again, she said, her voice ice cold even as her heart slammed wildly, and you'll lose that hand. His eyes darkened with rage. He raised his hand, ready to strike her, but it never reached her. A shadow moved in from behind, and in a single second, Serena heard bone break, clean and sharp, like a dry branch snapping in half. The man let out a horrific scream and collapsed, clutching a wrist bent at an unnatural angle. Dante stood there, his face a sheet of ice, without explanation or threat. He only looked down at the man writhing at his feet, then turned to Serena, took her hand, and led her away as if nothing had happened. They left the party right after that. In the car on the way back, silence stretched until Dante finally spoke. You didn't need me to save you, he said, eyes on the dark window. You handled it yourself. Serena looked at him, startled by the observation. No, she answered, more softly than she meant to. But I like it when you want to. Dante turned to her, something complicated passing through his eyes. More silence. Then he spoke again, his voice dropping lower. I know about your miscarriage, before you told me. Serena went still. The blood in her body seemed to stop. How? I investigated everything about you. Dante didn't look at her, as if confessing a sin, including your hospital records from when you were 22. I know you checked in alone. I know you lay there for 2 days without a single visitor. I know you were discharged and went back to an empty rented room. Serena couldn't breathe. Her most painful past, the thing she'd buried deepest, and he had known it from the beginning. I also know the name of the man who left you, Dante continued. Marcus Reed. He moved to Chicago 3 years ago. Works as an accountant for a small company. Married now, with a child. Serena trembled. What did you do to him? Nothing. Dante finally turned to her, his gray eyes deep and unreadable. Not yet. That's your choice. If you want, I'll make him pay. If you don't, he'll go on living his ordinary life, without ever knowing you survived him. Serena didn't know what she was supposed to feel. Fear because he knew everything about her, even the darkest corners. Or protected because he was willing to destroy anyone who'd ever hurt her. That night, when they returned to the penthouse, she didn't go back to her room. She followed Dante to his room, a place she'd never stepped into before. He looked surprised when she climbed into his bed, lay down beside him, and pulled his arm around her. Stay with me, she whispered. Tonight. Dante didn't ask why. He only held her tighter, his face buried in her hair, and for the first time she slept in his arms not because she was trapped, but because she wanted to. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was becoming part of his world. In the 24th week, Serena's belly had grown so much she had to slow down when she moved. The baby was more and more active, kicking over and over like she was dancing in that tight little space. Serena woke in the night to strong kicks, and every time she did, she pressed a hand to her stomach and smiled into the dark. Her daughter was alive, growing, waiting for the day she would be born. One morning, As sunlight began to slip through the curtains, Serena lay in bed and felt the baby kick harder than ever. Dante lay beside her, eyes still closed, but when she took his hand and placed it on her belly, he woke instantly. And then the baby kicked. Hard, right under his palm. Dante sat bolt upright, eyes wide, staring down at her stomach as if he'd just witnessed a miracle. The most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man who made an entire city afraid, looked like a child on Christmas morning when he felt his daughter move for the first time. "She's kicking so hard," he whispered, wonder filling his voice. Strong like her mother. Serena smiled and laid her hand over his, and dangerous like her father. They looked at each other and laughed. Real laughter, not forced, not hidden. The laughter of two people sharing a moment only they could understand. From that night on, Dante started talking to her belly every evening before sleep. He would lie down, bring his mouth close to her stomach, and whisper in Italian. Stories about the Carluchi family, about the far-off Italy where his ancestors were born, about the dreams he carried for his daughter. Sometimes he sang old lullabies his mother used to sing to him before she was taken away, his voice low and warm in the quiet night. Serena lay there listening and painting him in her mind. No longer the cold gray eyes, no longer the blood-stained hands, but a man with his hands resting gently on her belly, with a soft voice as he spoke to a child not yet born. She painted that image on canvas the next day, and for the first time, her painting held no darkness. But that night, after Dante had fallen into a deep sleep, Serena lay awake and watched him in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. She studied the sharp planes of his face, the faint scar along his jaw, the small lines at the corners of his eyes when he slept, and she thought, he imprisoned you. He watched you before you even knew he existed. He controlled everything in your life. He tortured people. He killed. He gave orders to end lives as if it were nothing. He's a monster. You should hate him. You have to hate him. But when he looked at you with those eyes, when he put his hand on your belly and spoke to the baby, when he held you every night like he was afraid you'd vanish, you couldn't hate him. Was this Stockholm Syndrome, or was it love? Was there even a difference, or were they just two faces of the same kind of madness? The next morning, Serena stood in the bathroom staring into the mirror. The woman staring back had glossy brown hair, the radiant skin of pregnancy, and eyes full of confusion. Who was she? A victim held captive by a mafia boss, or an accomplice falling in love with the man who'd kidnapped her? Did she have the right to love a man like Dante Carluchi? Or was she only lying to herself because she didn't have any other choice? The bathroom door opened. Dante walked in, still in sleep pants, his black hair mussed. He stopped behind her, met her eyes through the mirror, then wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hand settling over her rounded belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice still rough with sleep. Serena was quiet for a long time. Then she decided to tell the truth, because she was too tired of hiding. "I'm wondering if I'm crazy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Because I think I love you." Dante went still behind her. She felt the tension ripple through him, the way his breath stopped for a beat. "I know this is wrong," she went on, looking into his eyes in the mirror. "You're everything I should stay away from. You kidnapped me, locked me up, controlled me. You're the most dangerous man I've ever met." She drew a deep breath. "But I can't hate you. I've tried. I failed." Dante turned her around to face him. His gray eyes held hers without blinking, deep and flooded with feelings she couldn't fully read. "You shouldn't love me, Serena," he said, his voice rough. "I'll never be good for you. I'm darkness, violence, everything rotten in this world. You deserve more than that." "I know," she said, not looking away. Dante closed his eyes for a second, like he was fighting with himself. Then he opened them, and she saw something there she'd never seen before. Surrender. "But I need your love," he whispered, "because I don't know how to stop loving you. I've tried, since the first day I saw you. I failed worse than you did." He bent down and kissed her. Not a possessive kiss, not a demanding one. A kiss that was gentle, slow, full of love. They were together fully that morning, in the bathroom flooded with sunlight. No possession, no violence, only a tenderness she hadn't known he could give. When they lay together afterward, Dante whispered against her ear, his voice shaking, "Anima mia." She didn't know Italian, so she asked, "What does it mean?" "My soul," he answered, his lips brushing her hair. "You're my soul." Serena closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. but she smiled. She loved him, even though she knew she shouldn't, even though she knew he was a monster, and she accepted it. In the 28th week, Serena realized something was wrong. Dante had changed. Not in how he treated her. He was still gentle, still talked to her belly every night, still held her when they slept. But there was something in his eyes now, a buried tension he tried to hide and couldn't conceal from her anymore. The closed-door meetings ran late into the night. Nico came in and out of the penthouse constantly with a grave face, low voices drifting from the office and cutting off the moment she came near. She asked Dante what was happening, and he only kissed her forehead and said it was just business, and she didn't need to worry. But she knew he was lying. She saw security in the penthouse double, new guards appearing at every corner, every window sealed shut even though summer was coming, and she wasn't allowed outside anymore. Even the trips with Dante to meetings were canceled. She was locked in her gilded cage again, and this time she could smell danger in the air. The clues began to surface. One night she passed the office and heard Nico speaking into the phone, his voice tight, and she caught a familiar name. Romano. Her heart raced, but she kept walking as if she'd heard nothing. The next night, when she pretended to sleep, she saw Dante sit up, open the bedside drawer, and check a handgun. He checked the magazine, cocked it, then slid it under the pillow, right beside her head. He did it every night after that, and then the letter arrived. Serena happened to see it on Dante's desk when he'd forgotten to lock the door. A sheet of white paper with a crude drawing, a pregnant woman, and a blood-red X slashed across her. No words. No need for words. The message was more than clear. That night, Serena waited for Dante in the bedroom, sitting on the bed with the paper in her hands. When he walked in and saw what she was holding, his face went pale. "Don't hide it from me anymore," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I have the right to know. That's me in that drawing. That's our child. I have the right to know who wants to kill us." Dante stood still for a long moment, then sat beside her, bracing his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. When he looked up, she saw real exhaustion in his eyes for the first time. "Romano won't accept being humiliated," he said, his voice low. Ending the engagement with Valentina was a declaration of war to them, and now they've allied with the Benedettis, the family of the man you met at that party. Serena remembered the drunk man whose wrist Dante had snapped. "They're planning an attack," Dante went on. "But the target isn't me. They know killing me isn't easy, and even if they could, someone else would replace me. But if they kill you..." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "The target is you and the baby." Serena felt the blood in her body turn cold. "Why? I didn't do anything to them." "Because you're my weakness." Dante looked at her, pain filling his eyes. "The entire underworld knows it now. Killing you will destroy me more effectively than any bullet. And they know it." The bedroom door swung open and Nico stepped in, his face washed pale. He looked at Dante, then at Serena, as if weighing whether he should speak in front of her. "Say it," Dante ordered. "We found out who leaked information about Serena to Romano," Nico said, his voice tight as wire. "Who?" Dante snarled, shooting to his feet. "Valentina." The air in the room seemed to freeze solid. Serena saw Dante's body lock, every muscle drawn taut as if he were holding back something monstrous. After the engagement was broken, she secretly contacted the Romano and Benedetti sides. Nico went on, his tone flat, like reading a sentence. She gave them everything. Serena's schedule, the penthouse layout, the number of guards, the movement plans. Everything she learned while she was engaged to you. "She wants to die," Dante said through clenched teeth, and Serena had never heard his voice so terrifying. Serena stood and stepped to him, taking his hand. His hand trembled with rage, but when she touched him, he stopped. "Don't go alone," she whispered. "Don't do something reckless." Dante looked at her, and the fury in his eyes softened a fraction. "Not yet," he said. "First, I have to get you somewhere safe. There's a house outside the city. No one knows about it. It's not in any record. You'll be safe there. When? Tomorrow. Midnight. When no one expects it." That night, Serena lay in Dante's arms but couldn't sleep. She thought about Valentina, about the hatred in her eyes when she'd left the penthouse that day. She thought about the child inside her, about the blurred future waiting ahead, and she didn't know that at that exact moment, somewhere in the city, Valentina Romano was sending one last message. A message about the movement plan tomorrow, about the road they'd take, about the time they'd leave the penthouse. The enemy already knew, and they were waiting. In the 32nd week, at midnight, The convoy left the penthouse in darkness. Serena sat in the armored SUV in the middle of the formation, her hand locked around Dante's as if she was afraid he might vanish. Her belly was so large now, the baby inside finally asleep after a day of constant kicking. 3 security vehicles led the way. 2 followed behind, the tightest formation Dante could arrange. Nico sat in the driver's seat, eyes never leaving the road, his hands clamped hard on the steering wheel. No one spoke. The air was stretched tight as wire. They cleared Manhattan and took the highway north. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the road was empty. Nothing but headlights sweeping through the night and the steady thrum of engines. Serena began to loosen, resting her head on Dante's shoulder, letting herself believe they'd be safe. He'd protect her. He always protected her. Then the first vehicle exploded. A ball of fire erupted in the black, blinding and horrific, cutting across the road ahead. Serena didn't even have time to understand what was happening before gunfire cracked from every direction. Bullets slammed into the car like hail, the bulletproof glass spiderwebbing with fractures. "Get down!" Dante shouted, shoving her to the floor of the vehicle, his body covering hers completely. She heard his heart pounding wildly right by her ear, heard him barking orders into the radio, heard Nico curse and floor the gas. The SUV surged forward, punching through the wreckage of the burning car. Flames licked the windows, heat flooding in. Serena squeezed her eyes shut, wrapped both arms around her belly, and prayed for her daughter. The gunfire didn't stop. They were boxed in from all sides, black trucks blocking the roadway, shadowed figures with heavy weapons. The armored vehicle could take ordinary rounds, but the enemy had come prepared for more than that. Serena heard a different sound, metal tearing through metal, and then Dante let out a harsh groan. She lifted her head and saw blood. It seeped through his shoulder, dark red spreading fast. An armor-piercing round had punched through the door and lodged in his shoulder. "Dante," she screamed, pure panic. "I'm fine," he ground out, his face bleached with pain as he still held her pinned to the floor. "Shut up. Stay down." But she couldn't stay still. She ripped a strip of fabric and pressed it to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding even as her hands shook beyond control. His blood was hot and slick on her fingers, soaking through the cloth and spilling onto the floor. She'd never been this afraid in her life. Nico drove like a madman, swerving again and again to avoid fire, accelerating until the engine screamed. They smashed through a barricade, metal grinding on metal, sparks bursting into the air. But the road was slick with night mist, and when Nico jerked the wheel to avoid a truck lunging toward them, the tires lost grip. The SUV skidded, spun sideways, and slammed into the median. The impact threw Serena forward, her belly striking hard against the back of the front seat. Pain ripped through her from the inside, savage and brutal, stealing her voice and leaving only a broken sound. Then she felt it. Warm wetness between her legs, spreading fast, soaking through her dress. Not urine, blood. "No," she whispered, her trembling hand reaching down and finding red on her fingers. "No, no, no." The next pain hit, stronger, tightening around her belly as if someone was twisting her organs in their hands. She screamed, the sound splintering into the night. She was in labor. 32 weeks. Too early, too early. Dante saw the blood and every trace of color drained from his face. The Mafia boss who'd faced death without blinking was panicking now. His hand shook as he grabbed his phone, his voice cracking as he shouted into it. "Helena, right now. She's bleeding. She's in labor. We need you right now." Nico kept driving even with shattered glass, even with a tire gone flat, even with the engine making the sick sounds of something dying. He drove on sheer will, on desperation, on the unarguable command in Dante's eyes in the rearview mirror. Serena lay on the floor in a pool of blood, hers and Dante's, mixing until there was no separating them. Contractions crashed over her one after another, each one stronger than the last, and all she could do was scream, until her throat burned raw, until there was no breath left to scream with. Dante held her, one hand still clamped to his shoulder to stop the bleeding, but his eyes never left her. And for the first time in her life, Serena saw Dante Carluchi pray. His lips moved with words she couldn't make out. Italian or English she didn't know, but she knew they were pleas. Pleas to a God he probably didn't believe in. Pleas to a universe he probably despised. Pleas to any force that might be listening. Please save her. Please save my daughter. The SUV tore through the night, leaving gunfire and fire behind, racing toward a safe place that no one knew, and no one could be sure they'd reach. And Serena, trapped inside pain and terror, could think of only one thing: her daughter. A baby not ready to be born, A baby who might not survive. She cried, but her tears mingled with blood, and no one could tell the difference anymore. The estate in the suburbs appeared out of the night like a miracle. Nico drove the battered vehicle through the iron gates and stopped straight in front of the main doors, where warm yellow light was waiting. Serena was carried inside, blood still flowing, pain still tearing through her with every second. The wide living room had been turned into a makeshift delivery room, a bed shoved into place in haste, a mobile surgical lamp blazing overhead, and the thump of helicopter blades beating the air from the backyard. Dr. Helena rushed in with a bag of medical equipment, her silver hair whipped by the wind, and when she saw Serena on the bed and how much blood she'd lost, her face went gray. She didn't speak. She went to work at once, checking the baby's heartbeat, checking dilation, checking the amount of blood. Every second that passed was a fight between life and death. Serena lay on the bed, writhing with each contraction. She screamed until her voice broke, her hands clawing at the sheets until her knuckles went white. Sweat and tears blended together on her pale face, and she felt like her body was being split in two from the inside. Dante sat beside her, his hand locked around hers, not leaving for a single second. His shoulder was still bleeding, the wound still untreated, but when Helena tried to bandage him, he shoved her hand away. "Take care of her first," he growled. "I'm fine." Helena didn't have time to argue. She looked into Dante's eyes with a severity Serena had never seen. 32 weeks, premature, heavy blood loss, partial placental abruption. Her voice was tight, dangerous for both mother and baby. "I'll do everything I can, but you need to understand." She stopped and swallowed. "If the worst happens, I may have to choose to save one. Save them both," Dante said immediately, his voice a command that allowed no argument, at any cost. "I won't accept any other choice." Helena shook her head. "You don't understand. Medicine has limits." "No." Dante shot to his feet, his eyes burning like hell. "Listen to me. Save them both. I don't care what you have to do, what you have to use, what you have to sacrifice. Save both of them." Serena caught his hand and pulled him down. She looked into his eyes, and through the pain tearing her apart, she whispered, "Dante, if you can only save one, promise me, save the baby." He went rigid, like she'd driven a knife straight into his heart. "The baby needs to live," she went on, weak but unwavering. "She's innocent. She deserves a life. Promise me, Dante. If you have to choose, choose her." And then the unthinkable happened. Dante Carluchi, the Mafia boss who killed without blinking, who tortured enemies without hesitation, who built an empire on blood and violence, began to cry. Tears slid down the hard lines of his face and dropped onto the hand gripping hers. For the first time in his life, in front of anyone, he cried like a child being stripped of everything. "Don't talk nonsense," he said, his voice breaking apart. "You're going to live. Both of you are going to live. I won't allow you to die." He bent down, his forehead pressed to hers, his tears falling onto her cheeks. "You're not allowed to die, Serena. Do you hear me? I forbid it. You're everything I have. You and the baby. I can't lose you. I won't lose you." Labor began, and it lasted like hell on earth. Hour after hour, Serena fought through pain, through exhaustion, through the darkness trying to drag her under. She heard Helena giving orders, heard machines beeping, heard Dante saying her name again and again. "Stay with me, Serena. Stay." He repeated it like a prayer, like an order, like a plea. "You're stronger than this. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. Stay with me." She tried. She tried for him, for the baby, for everything she'd survived to get here. But her body was giving up. Her strength was draining away, and the darkness was coming closer. She couldn't feel the pain anymore. All she could hear was Dante's voice, far away, like it was coming from the end of a tunnel. Then, after 6 hours of battle, a sound broke through. A cry, thin but unmistakable, the cry of life. A baby girl. Helena's voice shook with relief. 5.5 pounds, lungs working well. My God, this is a miracle. Serena forced her eyes open, trying to turn toward the sound. She saw Helena holding a tiny, wrinkled, red-skinned little life, crying with all the strength of newborn lungs. Her daughter with Dante, alive. "My baby," Serena whispered, a fragile smile blooming on her lips. Then darkness swallowed her, and she passed out. While Serena lay unconscious, Helena placed the baby into Dante's arms. He looked down at the tiny life in his hands, not even 6 pounds, and yet she was his entire universe. The baby's skin was flushed, her hair black and soft as silk, her eyes squeezed shut. She stopped crying in his arms, as if she recognized this was safety. Dante Carluchi, the monster of New York's underworld, held his daughter and cried without a sound. Tears fell onto the small face, and in his heart he swore it. He swore he'd protect her at any cost. He swore he'd burn anyone who dared touch his daughter or her mother. He swore he'd turn the world to ash if he had to, just to keep his family safe. Isabella Carlucci was born on a night of blood and fire, and her father, with hands that had once dealt death, learned how to hold his child for the first time with a gentleness he'd never believed he could possess. 3 days passed like a blurred dream. Serena opened her eyes and saw late afternoon sunlight slipping through the curtains, gentle and warm. She lay in a large bed with crisp white sheets, her body aching as if a truck had run straight over her. But she was alive. She turned her head and saw Dante sitting in the chair beside her, slumped forward, his hand still wrapped around hers. He looked wrecked, deep shadows under his eyes, stubble rough across his jaw, black hair in disarray. His shoulder was bandaged, old blood still staining the gauze. He clearly hadn't slept in days, hadn't left her side for even a moment. She moved slightly, and he woke instantly, eyes flying open in alarm, then softening when he saw her looking at him. "I thought I was going to die," Serena whispered, her voice raw from days of silence. "I didn't allow it," Dante answered, his voice just as hoarse. "You're not allowed to leave me, not ever." Then she heard it. A tiny cry, weak but unmistakable, drifting from the white cradle beside the bed. Her daughter. Serena tried to sit up, and Dante immediately helped her, propping pillows behind her, gentle as if she were made of glass. Then he went to the cradle and lifted a small bundle wrapped in white. For the first time, Serena saw her daughter while fully awake. The baby was so small, skin flushed red, with black hair soft as silk and sweet pink lips working as she searched. Tears spilled without control, and Serena cried from happiness, from relief, because she thought she might never get to see this moment. Dante carried Isabella to her, clumsy and overly careful, like he was holding a bomb that could go off at any second. "She's so tiny," he whispered, eyes locked on his daughter. "I'm afraid I'll break her." Serena let out a weak laugh through tears. "You don't shake when you torture people, but you're scared to hold your own baby." "Different," Dante said. He placed Isabella into Serena's arms, and when she held her for the first time, she felt like everything had been worth it. Every pain, every fear, every drop of blood, this little girl mattered more than his life. The days that followed were the most peaceful Serena had ever known. She stayed in bed recovering, watching Dante learn to be a father with a patience she'd never believed he possessed. The first time he changed a diaper, he did it backward, forgetting to open the tabs before he tried to wrap it. The second time, he forgot to clean her before putting on the new diaper. The third time, he finally did it right, and Serena watched him smile to himself like he'd conquered the world. He learned to feed her with a bottle, strangely patient when Isabella cried and refused the nipple, soothing her gently until she finally drank. And late at night, when Isabella woke crying, Serena heard Dante singing lullabies in Italian, an old song his mother used to sing to him before she was taken from him. Now he sang it to his daughter, his voice low and warm in the quiet dark. One dawn, Serena woke and saw Dante standing by the window with Isabella in his arms, watching the first sunlight turn the garden gold. His back was tall and steady, the baby tucked perfectly in the circle of his arms, and Serena thought, "This is the man I love. Not the powerful mafia boss, not the cold-blooded killer. The man who sang to his daughter in his mother tongue, who learned diapers and bottles, who cried when he watched her be born." "Isabella," she said, and Dante turned to look at her. "Her name is Isabella. Bella means beautiful in Italian." Dante smiled, stepped to the bed, and bent to kiss his daughter's forehead. "Our Bella," he whispered. But when he lifted his head and looked out the window again, Serena saw his eyes change. The tenderness vanished, replaced by something cold and ruthless. She knew what he was thinking. Romano, Benedetti, Valentina, the people who had almost stolen his family from him. In this safe house, they had 3 days of peace. 3 days to love, to heal, to learn how to be parents. But Serena knew the peace wouldn't last. She knew darkness was still waiting outside, and she knew Dante would go and take revenge for what they'd done. On the morning of the 4th day, Serena woke to the hollow feeling of empty space beside her. She opened her eyes and saw Dante standing by Isabella's cradle, watching his daughter sleep. But something was different. He wasn't in sleepwear. He was in a black suit, the kind of suit she knew wasn't for meetings, the kind he wore when he went to do things she didn't want to think about. The sun wasn't fully up yet, dawn only a pale line on the horizon, but Dante was already ready to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. Dante didn't turn around, his eyes still on Isabella's tiny face. "Something needs to be handled," he answered, calm in a way that was frightening. Then he came to the bed, bent down, and kissed Serena's forehead, gentle and soft. He turned to the cradle and kissed Isabella's forehead, his lips brushing the baby's skin like a promise. "Stay here," he said. "Don't go anywhere. Helena will stay with you." Serena caught his hand before he could step away. "Dante," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you coming back?" He turned to look at her, and she saw gray eyes gone steel cold, stripped of the tenderness of the man who sang lullabies to their daughter each night. This was Don Carluchi. This was the monster. "I always come back," he said. "To you." And then he was gone. The door closed. His footsteps faded. An engine started, then disappeared into the early morning mist. And Serena stayed behind, holding her daughter, waiting. Dante was gone for 3 days, the longest 3 days of Serena's life. She stayed in the safe house with Isabella and Helena, not knowing where he was, not knowing if he was safe, not knowing what he was doing. She held the baby whenever fear rose, as if Isabella were the only life raft in the storm. She couldn't sleep, lying awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound, hoping it would be his footsteps coming back. Then the news began to appear on television. On the first day, an emergency report said the Romano headquarters had gone up in flames at midnight. The fire burned the entire building to the ground. 15 people dead, no survivors. Police suspected a targeted attack, but had no leads. Serena watched the smoking ruins on the screen and said nothing. On the second day, news broke that the Benedetti leaders had vanished. Then their bodies were found in the Hudson River, in pieces, heads in one place, torsos in another. Arms and legs scattered along the shoreline. Police called it the most brutal gang execution in a decade. Serena turned off the TV, then turned it back on hours later because she couldn't stand not knowing. On the third day, the main Romano estate was raided. Every male member of the family was executed, old and young, no one left alive. Blood soaked the polished marble floors, and the message was unmistakable. Never touch the Carluchi family again. But the final detail made Serena go cold. Valentina Romano was found alive, sitting in the corner of her bedroom, eyes empty, hair tangled, repeating the same words like someone who'd lost her mind. "Please spare me, please spare me." She hadn't been killed. Death was too gentle for a traitor. Dante had let her live with permanent terror, live with the memory of what she'd watched. Helena came over and shut off the TV, looking at Serena with worry. "You shouldn't watch these things," she said softly. Serena didn't answer. She only held Isabella tighter, feeling the baby's warmth, the steady rise and fall of her breathing. This was why Dante did all of it. On the fourth day, as sunset turned the sky red, the door opened. Dante stood there, his silhouette cut against the evening light. He'd lost the suit somewhere, leaving only a wrinkled white shirt, and Serena saw small smears of blood he'd forgotten to wipe from his cuffs. His face held no expression. His eyes were hollow, as if his soul was still out there and his body had come home without it. Serena rose from the chair, Isabella asleep in her arms, and walked to him. She stopped in front of him and looked into gray eyes that were slowly beginning to return to life. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked, his voice rough. "Now you know what I do. Now you know what I am." Serena looked at him. A killer, a monster, her child's father, the man she loved, all of it in one, impossible to separate. She placed Isabella into his arms. "She needs her father," Serena said, gentle but steady. "I need you. Come home." Dante took his daughter, looked down at the small, sleeping face in his hands, and Serena saw a miracle. The darkness in his eyes began to dissolve, the emptiness filling with something soft and warm. His soul came back. Serena stepped in and wrapped her arms around both of them from behind, her cheek resting against his back, her arms circling him and their daughter. "We're going home for real," she whispered. "All 3 of us." The monster had killed, blood had been spilled, the debt had been paid, but the father had come back, and at last, the family was whole. A year passed like a beautiful dream. The Manhattan penthouse was now filled with Isabella's clear, bright laughter, a 1-year-old little girl with her father's glossy black hair and her mother's vivid green eyes. She toddled through her first steps, babbled her first sounds, and every moment was a miracle in Serena's eyes. Serena had changed. She wasn't the poor painter girl in Brooklyn anymore, and she wasn't a prisoner in a gilded cage anymore. Serena Wells was now the lady of the Carluchi house, not only Don Carluchi's wife, but also his partner in every decision. She sat in closed-door meetings, offered strategic insight, and earned respect not because she was the boss's wife, but because of her own intelligence and sharpness. She still painted, but her canvases were now flooded with light and color. Isabella sleeping soundly in her cradle, Dante smiling as he held his daughter. The whole family gathered together in the glow of sunset. Those paintings were displayed in the most prestigious galleries in New York under a pen name, and no one knew the sought-after artist was the wife of one of the most dangerous men in the city. That dawn was so beautiful it hurt. Golden sunlight poured through the glass, and Serena stood in the bedroom doorway, watching the scene before her with a throat tight with emotion. Dante stood by the window, bare-chested, tattoos and scars stretching across his skin like stories of violence and survival. But in his arms, Isabella lay perfectly nestled, green eyes blinking up at her father, tiny hands patting at his face. "Papa," the baby babbled, the first word she'd learned to call him. Dante smiled, a radiant smile Serena had never seen before Isabella was born, and he sang a lullaby in Italian, his voice low and warm, filling the sunlit room. The hands that had once dealt death were now cradling a tiny life as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. Serena lifted a hand to her chest and touched her mother's silver locket, the one she'd worn every day for 11 years. 11 years of keeping it close, and never daring to open it, as if whatever lay inside might hurt her. But today, watching her family in the dawn light, she felt ready. She opened the small clasp, and the locket sprang apart. Inside was a tiny photograph, yellowed with time. Her mother, young and beautiful, holding Serena at 3 years old, both of them smiling brightly in the sun. And on the back of the photo, a message engraved in a trembling hand appeared. "Find love, my daughter, no matter where it comes from." Tears spilled without control, but this time they were tears of happiness. Her mother had known. Somehow from 24 years ago, she had known her daughter would need to hear this. She had left this message for her, waiting for the exact moment Serena was ready to receive it. Dante turned, saw her crying, and immediately handed Isabella to the nanny before coming to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, lifting her chin, his thumb wiping the tears from her cheek. Serena showed him the locket, her mother's words. Dante read it, fell silent for a long moment, then pulled Serena into his arms and held her tight as if he feared she might dissolve. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice low at her ear. "Everything that happened, the way we began." Serena looked up at him, into the gray eyes she'd learned to love. "I burned the ultrasound picture because I thought it was the only way to be free," she said softly. "I thought running from you was the only way to protect our child. But I was wrong." "Wrong how?" "Freedom isn't running away," she said, placing her hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "Freedom is being with the person who makes you want to stay. You're a monster, Dante. I know that. I accept that. And you're the man I love. Both of those things are true." Dante kissed her forehead, his lips warm and gentle. "This world can burn," he whispered. "Enemies can come. Blood can spill. But we'll always get back up together. Always." Dawn spilled gold over the city below, and the kingdom built on blood and shadow still stood tall over Manhattan. But at the peak of that empire, the girl who had once burned her own dream found what she'd been searching for her whole life. A family, and a love that, even born from darkness, still burned brighter than any flame. This story leaves us with a profound lesson about love and acceptance. No one is perfect, and sometimes love comes from the places we least expect. What matters isn't a person's past, but how they treat the people they love. Serena found a family in the arms of a mafia man because she saw the real person behind the frightening mask. And Dante, even if he was a monster to the whole world, could still be the gentlest father, the most loving husband. Real life is the same way. Sometimes the best things come from the hardest circumstances, and happiness isn't found in perfection. It's found in acceptance and unconditional love. How do you feel about this story? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to accept someone with all their strengths and flaws? Share your feelings in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories and thoughts from deep in your hearts. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share the video to support us as we continue bringing you more moving stories every day. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again in the next video.